Okay, so we're up to Siman Lamed Tes, Sif Gimel. The story so far is that we're discussing who is kosher to write a Sefer Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzahs. And we said yesterday that an Isha, a Cotton, a Kuti, a Min, a Moiseh, they're not able to write Tefillin, Sefer Torah, and Mezuzah. And the reason is because it says, Ukashartem uchasavtem, kol she'ena b'kshira, or ena ma'amin bo, ena b'chsiva. Anyone who is not mechuyev, for example, an Isha, or for example, a Kuti, or someone who doesn't believe in it, for example, a Mumma, for example, then is not able to write it. And we said in Halacha Beis, not only can't he write it, but kol she'posel l'kosan posel b'chol tikun asyason, is precluded from doing all the other types of tikkun, of fixing the tefillin and mezuzahs. That's the story so far. So Halacha Gimel, Sif Gimel. Ger shechazar ledosoi machmas yira. What about a ger who converted, of course, to Judaism, and now he's chayzer because of fear. He's left Yiddishkeit and he's gone back to his original religion. Kosher lichtov tefillin. He's actually allowed to write tefillin. Explains the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Katan Aleph. Because he was chayzer because of Yira. Says Rashi, shelo yargu. He was threatened of the pain of death. But after be'emes hoyle limser nafsho lemunas Hashem, and be'emes he should have been mekadesh Shemayim and given himself to be killed. Mikal makom lo yotz michlal Yisrael. That doesn't take him out of the status of Yisrael al yedei zeh, given the hoy ba'inus, because he was ba'inus. Va'ayim b'magen Avram shehe'ela. One shouldn't be maker with this. Afilu betzina who shemer saTorah. Even if this person betzina keeps the Torah, rakshe behanochas tefillin humis atzel. He's just lazy in not putting on tefillin. Tahalo al kol ponim eina b'kshira, because at the end of the day he is not considered in mechuyev in the kshira. The kolshkenim hu mumel lechala Torah kula, and certainly if he's a mumel lechala Torah kula, if he rejects all of Torah, im lo machmas pachad, unless there was some sort of fear, shelo yarguhu, who yori lekayim es haTorah afilu betzina, that he's scared to keep Torah even betzina. Va'ayim bebeh hagrosh maskim gam kein lemogen Avram. The Gan is maskim to the Mogen Avram. Oid kos of the Mogen Avram b'shem hadarki Moshe. The af Sifrei Torah, that is true even with Sifrei Torah, that mamza v'ger toishov, a mamza and a ger toishov, what is that? He's non-Jewish, but he undertakes to keep the shev mitzvnei noach. Psulim lichtov, they are possible to write a Sefer Torah. Kameshkos b'yerder siman reish pei aleph. Afilu hochi, but tefillin mezuzahs ein lochush. With regard to tefillin mezuzahs, they are able to write it. V'chol achreinim iskimu the ger toishov posel l'chsivas stam. However, the achreinim agree that a ger toishov is possible to write Sefer Torah mezuzah, tefillin mezuzah, the ha'ein b'kshir, because he's not mechuyev. Va'ayin b'bir halacha, and check out the bir halacha. So if you take a look, just the first few lines of this bir halacha, it's at the bottom there, shekosov apikuros. Sefer Torah or tefillin or mezuzah, which is written by an apikuros. So says the Mishnah Berurah in bir halacha, who the oduk la'avodas kechovim. The definition of an apikuros is someone who is very attached to avodah zarah. Kein isa Beis Yosef b'shem Rashi. That's how the Beis Yosef quotes Rashi. Okay, and the case of Mishnah as well, in the name of the Rambam. La'fuke, to exclude mashahuga be'ezed fusei Rashi in Gittin mem he'amud beis, to exclude the different opinion of Rashi, which is brought in Gittin mem he'amud beis, that apikuros is a Yehudi she'ein ma'amin l'divrei Rabbeinu. That apikuros is someone who doesn't believe in the Rabbanon, in the words of Chazal. So jumping a line, or the Inyan dinner, and according to halacha, what is the bottom line? Sofer kazeh nearly poshet the tzorich lignois parshi Yosef. A sofer like this, you've got one has to burn tzorich lignois parshas. You've got to do geniza of the parshas. The shemelo ibet haklaf lishma, because maybe you didn't process the klaf properly. The shemelo kosva parshas vaskoros lishma, and maybe you didn't. He didn't do all the parshas properly and with all the shemas. V'shemelo hayazoy beduk bedin chak teichus. Given the enamam b'divrei Chazal, the gam choshed l'hach shlachir. Okay, I think I've just read the bir halacha on the next halacha. Apologies, I read the wrong bir halacha. Okay, let's do the next halacha and then we'll come back to it. Tefillin shekosm apikuros. Here you go. Sorry, sif dalet. Tefillin shekosm apikuros yisarfu. Tefillin which have been written by an apikuros yisarfu. V'yesh omrim yigonzu. So if it's written by an apikuros, some say you burn it and some say you do geniza. You have to bury it. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Yud Beis apikuros v'ayim b'be halacha. Sorry, now on that That's what I should have been referring to. So on that, let's just go back to the bottom line. Well, the Indian dinner, he says that the Maisa, you've got to bury it. Why? He says Poshet, Sofa, because they're nearly Poshet, the Tzorech Lignos Pashosov. That if you nowadays, regardless of what you want to call the status of an apikoros, is he because he's oduk in Avodah Zarah, or is it he's just not ma'amin in what the words of Chazal? That we've got other concerns, says the Mishnah Berurah. The other concerns are the Shema lo imed hapakaf lishma. Maybe he didn't process the leather lishma, and maybe he didn't write the parshas or haskaros lishma, i.e. the shemas of Hashem. He didn't write them lishma, the shem Hashem. The Shema lo hayazoy bedin chak teiches. Maybe he wasn't careful on chak teiches. Yeah, we're familiar with these halachas, right? We don't know. You look at the Sefer Torah, the mezuzah, the parchment. You don't know. Maybe there was a blob of ink and he scraped it away and he formed the letter that way. Given the inamam b'divrei Chazal, because he doesn't care about the words of Chazal. V'gam choshed hu lahach shlacherim. He's also choshed lahach shlacherim. So therefore, ledina, says the Mishnah Berurah, in Bihalacha, you actually have to bury it. Okay, continuing the Mishnah Berurah, you sorrowful, but there are those opinions who say burn it. Im azkarisehen, you bury it, you burn it with the shemas of Hashem. Because Mistama, he wrote it l'shem avodah zarah. He wrote the shemas Hashem, not thinking of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but thinking of his deity. V'yesherim yigonzu. Why? What's the svara to say that you should bury it? The end says the Mishnah Berurah in Sifkat Nudalad. The end derech apikoros laniach tefillin, because the apikoros he's not a mamin, and therefore he is not his way to put on tefillin. Or bevadai kos for limka Yisrael, and therefore he certainly wrote it to sell to a Yisrael. And he didn't have in mind his deity, his avodah zarah. He had in mind to sell it to another to a Jewish person. And therefore there is a rule that in the Mishnah Berurah is a very important klal. That if the Mechaba says in a halacha, stam, a halacha, v'yesh omrim, so what do you do? So the halacha is stam, v'yesh, halacha kastam. So the das hamachaba lifsei kedei rishena. The halacha, the das hamachaba is the paskan like the first view. Lochein kosu b'stama. Therefore, he expresses it in a way of a stam, and then yesh omrim. In other words, the way the Mechaber writes it in Dalad is Tefillin shekos b'keres yisarfu. That's a stam expression, and therefore that's his favored halacha. V'yesh omrim yigonzu. Okay, and like I said in the halacha, that the Mishnah Berurah says nowadays you bury it for all the reasons he said there in the halacha. Okay, halacha hey. Nimtzu biyad apikoros. What if you find the tefillin in the hands of apikoros? Ve'en yodua mikosovam, and we don't know who wrote them. Says the Mechaber, Yigonzu, in that situation you bury it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sifkat and Tesvaim, Yigonzu misofik, out of doubt you bury it, Shemahu ksofon, because maybe this apikoros wrote them himself. Avl in lisref misofik, out of doubt you can't burn it. That's the source for Gniza. That you can't do this, talking about the Mizbeach, and by extension, all Kisvei Kodesh with the Shemus of Hashem, you can't erase them. That's the source for Gniza. Okay, Mechikas Hashem. Okay, Halacha Vov, Sif Vov. Nimsu biyad eine Yehudi. What if you go to, imagine you go to you're in holiday season. You go to somewhere out of town, and you go to an antique shop, and you see a pair of tefillin. So are they kosher? They're not kosher. Nimtzu biyad ein Yehudi ve'en yodeh miksovom ksherim. You don't know who wrote them. They're actually kosher. It says the Mishnah Berurah Sifkat and Tezvov, Tezayin. The stam of the gilulim ein bekin lichtov. The guy in the shop there in Margate or wherever, it's unlikely that he wrote it. B'vada Yisrael Kosova Mistama, it's very likely that the Yisrael wrote it of a prat m'kemesenu, and especially in our places sheyodua she'ein enum Yehudim yodin lichtov, where non-Jewish people don't know how to write tefillin. Afilu b'sefer Torah, even a sefer Torah shnimsa b'yodon masik hashach l'kula alma kasheira to talin enum Yehudim bezu bozu oisa. And we're worried that Enim Yehudim Bozer, so maybe they just sort of they stole it from someone. Now that could be very interesting. What if you find the Sefer Torah on eBay? Yeah, are we chayshish that the non-Jewish person wrote it? No, they don't have to write the Sefer Torah, and therefore Mistama, he says they're kosher. Okay, Zayin. You're not allowed to buy Sefer Torah and tefillin and mezuzahs from a kuti, at an exorbitant price. It's more than their face value, a lot, because otherwise it will encourage them to steal them. Yeah, it's a good business. You can break into a shul, steal tefillin, sell them, and then you can sell them, and you didn't will pay anything to get them back. So therefore, there's a gezerah ein loikchin yosem ichteihen harbe. Says the Mishnah Berurah, alva b'mat yoseh, but if it's a little bit more than their value, mishavyon tahainu at kadei chatzi dinner b'tefillin, half a dinner for tefillin lefi erech zeh b'sefer Torah chayaven liknos mem. If it's only a little bit more, then you are mechuyev to buy from them. After Sefer Torah, even though we say that a Sefer Torah that is found with a non-Jewish person yigones, nonetheless you're mechuyev to buy them, even for a little bit more than their actual value, not to use it, but to bury it. That the non-Jewish people shouldn't come to mezalzel the Sefer Torah. If they are actually apostle, you go past the antique shop and you see a Sefer Torah and you see that they're apostle, you still have a chiyuv, if you can, to buy them even a little bit more than their regular price in order that you bury it. But if they're written by an apikoros to tunin streifa that needs burning, that you don't need to buy from them because it hasn't got the same kedusha. It's written by an apikoros. Harbe, you mustn't buy it if it's an exorbitant price. V'afal pikein, says the Mishnah Berurah in Yudches, lo yisalik atzma Yisrael tekef mimenu af sha'ime harbe. When you negotiate with this non-Jewish person, don't just walk away as soon as he says, at a crazy price. You got to sort of handle a little bit that you can get him down to a reasonable price. Even if he stands firm in his position, he'll keep them there. Don't go in too cheap. I'll buy it for a $5, this Sefer Torah, buy it for a few dollars, because he'll get so angry with you that he'll maybe do something crazy to the Sefer Torah. Okay, halacha ches. Ein nikachin ela min mumcha. You should only buy tefillin from a mumcha shebaki b'chaseres v'yaseres, who is an expert in chaseres and yaseres. What does that mean? It says Mishnah Berurah Yutes min mumcha. Not from someone who's not mumcha. Even if the lokeach wants to check them, because we're worried that you might not check them properly, you might miss something. Maybe you'll forget even to check it, because to undo the stitching of the tefillin is very cumbersome. A regular sofa who is public sofa, he's got a chazaka that he is a mumcha. Mezuzah, v'huadin parshas tefillin, mikoches afilu shlemin mumcha. However, mezuzah and parshas of tefillin, not the actual tefillin, but the actual just the parshas, that can be bought even shlemin mumcha over tonight sheyivdekena achakach. So long as you check them, because that's easier to check. You have to start opening up the tefillin. That's easier just to cast your eye over it. Okay, halacha tes. Lokach mimisha ina mumcha. If you buy it from someone who is not a mumcha lebodkon, then you've got to check them. Lokach mimenu me ktzitzos. If you buy it, lokach mimenu me ktzitzos. You buy 100 klafim. Yeah. Boydek mehem shleisha ktzitzos. You can check 3 of them. You don't have to check all 100. You bought 100 klafim. Just check 3 of them. Shtayim shel rosh v'achas shel yad, shtayim shel yad v'achas shel rosh. You can check 2 shel yad, 1 shel rosh, or vice versa. In motzim kasherim, and if you find that they're kosher, huchzuk yad ho'ish v'hari kulam kasherim. Then the guy's got a chazaka, and then all of them are kosher. Ve'ein hashar tzorich bedika, and the other 97 or whatever do not need bedika. Ve'im lokchon svasim. If you buy heaps of them, there's little bundles of them. Cheskosim eloshim harbeim lekuchim. Each bundle is from a different person. Lefichach boydek mikol sevesh shnayim shel rosh ve'echot shel yad, or shnayim shel yad ve'echot shel rosh. You've got to check 3 of each bundle. And hameichet tefillin. A person sells tefillin and say, these tefillin, they belong to an Adam Gadol. Ne'eman ve'ein strichim bedika. In that situation, the guys believed and they don't need bedika, says the Mishnah Berurah. Lokach, but the evet she'ein sham muchbei. If you haven't got time to check all 100, you only have to check 3 of them. Lebodkon b'chaseres v'yaseres, just check there's no words or letters missing, or too many words or letters. V'huadin b'tumna sa'osis imem kalacha, just check the tzura of each letter if they're kalacha. V'chanal b'simen lamedvav sif alef. Ve'ein locha shema ibrod ibdon shel lishmon. You don't have to worry that the leather wasn't processed properly. Because people are bocky with that. Ve'in hashar, and you don't have to check the rest. That's when the guy says he himself wrote them. He bought them from one person. Because then we assume that the one person wrote that whole little bundle. Godel, a guy says, I bought it from the God. This tefillin belonged to an Odom Godel. Nearer to Huadinim, Omar Shalok Mumcha, or he bought them from a Mumcha. Nemon, the Eid Echod Nemon Bisurin. Because I'm going to Avram, I'll call upon him, but in Shemakir Nosa Shu Muchza Bekashrus, that we never recognize the guy's Muchza Bekashrus. Ein Yeredeh, Simon Kufites, Sif Beis Bago, or Lefi HaMavua, Shasham Muchach Dim Reinu Shalovshan Ba'atzmai, that if he himself is wearing them, Nem B'chol Gavna, then for sure is Nem B'chol Gavna, the Laver Ba'atzma B'vada in a Choshet, because he's not going to violate it himself and wear apostle tefillin. Va'ayin shom b'shach sif katan aleph. Ve'ein tzrichim bedika shechazok al chova she'ein moitzi mitachas yod dov she'ein mesakin. Because we have a chazaka that a chova is not going to take out something which is not mesukin. Let's just finish off Yud. Sif Yud tefillin shehuchzuku b'kashrus. This is very important halacha. Tefillin which are muchzuk b'kashrus einam tzrichim bedika la'olam. So you bought them from a mumcha. You spent a lot of money on a tefillin. You don't need to check them. But if they're only worn on occasion, then then you need to check them twice in 7 years, says the Ramah. And if you haven't got a sofa who can open them up and then stitch them back properly, better not to tamper with them and open them up, because otherwise you're not going to be able to put them back properly, etc. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot and Chavov, La'elam, Shekol Zman Shetchifuyin Sholem, so long as the tefillin are complete, Harihin B'cheskosin Menadin, nothing happens to them, they're chazaka, that they're okay. Ve'ein Choshin Shemen Nimchaka Ois Miteichon Oy Nekava, you don't have to be worried that an ice suddenly disappeared or they became perforated. Nevertheless, it's correct to check them. Why? Because you put tefillin on and the sweat sometimes destroys or messes up the tefillin. If there is a tear in the leather or they fall into water, then you've got to check them straight away. Another one, by the way, is if you leave them in the car when they're very hot, in the hot weather, then that could also damage the tefillin. You've got to be very careful of that. Because if they fall into water, then the ksav could become ruined. And anything which requires bedika, but there's just no one to check it, put them on without a bracha, because you're not absolutely sure that the tefillin are kosher. Because you can't rely on a chazaka in a situation where there's something happened to them that destroyed the chazaka. So too, if you put them in a wet place, you've got to just check out whatever happened to them. So you said that if there's a chazaka, you have to check them at all. Yeah, it's good to if you can find someone, but that's only if you're wearing them the whole time. But if you only wear them on occasion, then it's twice in 7 years. To chashin and shemen is afshu, because we're worried that they became decayed. Lochein yivdekem shnei pam b'shmita. You check them twice in 7 years. And yanichem kach, i.e., says the Ramah, that if you haven't got someone to restitch them, then just leave them. And regarding the bracha, it's mashma from the chayodom, the tzarech levarech, that you do need to make a bracha in that situation. V'hatam nir, and the reason is mishum delay ra'inu alein reyusa b'debura. There's no reyusa, there's no something which destroyed the chazaka. We didn't see them fall in water or something like that. Masha'en came b'nishrum b'mayim, and as opposed to where they did fall into water, when the leather became ruined. And therefore you have to check it out. If you find tefillin which have been thrown and discarded into gniza, and they look like they're ruined, you've got to be choishish that there is a psul in them, otherwise what are they doing in the gniza? But if you find them placed there neatly, nicely, but kisson in the bag, then you don't have to be worried. Okay, say that interesting halachas.